Hnrs? All right, so let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? We left off today in class talking about Charles V, right? So now Charles V is going to be our first absolutist that we discussed, right? We talked about marriages of convenience. We went through the entire family tree. We discussed how he's going to be able to acquire the Holy Roman Empire by bribing electors, and his family's going to do that for several hundred years in a row, minus a couple of little small interludes of other families actually being Holy Roman emperors, but it didn't last very long. But big thing is we also know that Charles is going to split his family in half and create an Austrian branch and a Spanish branch, right? And the Spanish branch is going to be taken over by his son Philip, who we're about to talk about here in 2 seconds. He's going to be our second absolutist. And then we're going to be getting into why the Spanish branch eventually fell, right? Now, big thing about Spain, all right, is that underneath Habsburg rule, they're going to get torched. And some of y'all are probably like, why is this terrifying lady on my screen? All right, so not me. I mean this person. That's not a woman. That's a man. All right, so that is Carlos II of Spain, one of the great-grandchildren of Charles V. Now, what the heck is wrong with his face? All right, so, well, big thing about it is, remember we talked about marriages of convenience, right? The Habsburgs, in Spain particularly, began to do nothing but marry their first cousins. I know Colleen right now was like, who? So they ended up getting this thing known as the Habsburg jaw, right? This was evident of genetic deformities due to the massive amount of incest occurring in the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs over several generations, right? They were the ones that are going to be the kings of Spain up until the late 1600s, early 1700s, underneath Carlos II. And he becomes the very, very last Habsburg king of Spain, one of the great-grandchildren of Charles V, right? So now, looking at him, they actually ended up dying out in Spain due to the fact that Carlos II here was sterile, all right? 1, could not have children. 2, he also could not talk until he was 4 years old because of his jaw being so bad that when he would try to make some noise, he'd go, so he drooled constantly, and he didn't learn how to walk until he was 8 because he also had mental, depravities. No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Mental inadequacies, right? So due to all the incest in his family. Apparently he was a really good marksman, though. Apparently he could be like, pull, and they'd throw a clay and be like, bow. Well, actually, for him, he'd probably be like, all right, but anyway, so as you can see, it's just important to know that you always know a Habsburg when you see that jaw, but a Spanish Habsburg, right? The Austrian Habsburgs didn't have it as bad because they actually married into other families pretty often. Now, the big guy that's going to take over, though, right after Charles V, some of y'all probably wrote Carlos II down. You're like, who is that? That's a later king. I'm just trying to show you that the Habsburgs are going to end up actually having massive problems with incest and stuff. But this dude takes over after his father, Charles V. Now, this guy is Philip II. Not to be confused with Alexander the Great's dad, Philip II, okay? Philip II of Macedonia is the father of Alexander II, or Alexander III, right? Or Alexander the Great. Philip II of Spain is the son of Charles V, okay? Named after his grandfather, Philip the Handsome, or Philip I, right? So now, getting forward, though, this dude's also personality is very different from his father's, right? He is shy and recluse. What I mean by that is he is quiet. He is a very conservative guy, and he is a very, very intense, smoldering figure, right? This is Philip II. Look at that jaw, right? That's some Habsburg jaw right there. But he's also a ferocious Catholic, right? He blames Protestant forces, the Reformation, and everything else involved for destroying his father's ability to rule, right? Because I don't know if you remember this or not, but looking back at the diet, oh yeah, by the way, this is what Charles V had, that's gout. Diet of Worms, right? So looking back on this, the Diet of Worms was the meeting that his father called to tell Luther to take back his ideas, leading to the Protestant Reformation. And it was not until his princes betrayed him and started hiding Martin Luther that it destroyed his father's ability to rule and it forces him to go to war. So that's Charles V, his Philip II's dad, right there on that throne in 1521 at the Diet of Worms, right? But as of 1556, now Philip's in charge, okay? Philip is now in charge, and he decides that he's going to take over Portugal, and since his father only gave him half of that grand empire that his father owned, he decides, he's like, you know what? I'm here to conquest. I'm here to get more, take more, be better than my father, take over more things, and I'm going to do my own thing. And I'm going to let him live in that little French monastery and vows of silence and love his clocks on the wall and fake his own funeral, right? Now, look, Biggest thing that he does, though, is underneath the reign of Philip, Spain becomes the wealthiest and richest country in the entire world. Also the most powerful when it comes to land acquisition and several other things like that. Now, he ends up moving forward and decides that that land is not enough. And he goes and he marries Bloody Flipping Mary. I'm not kidding. He actually marries Bloody Mary, right? This is like a drawing of a stupid little cartoon representation of their marriage, but he goes off and he marries the Tudor queen following Edward VI and the death of his father. But somebody actually made this connection in class as well. That's his cousin too, right? He marries Bloody Mary and becomes the King of England. But here's the thing. Jot this down, his kingship of England was a joke. It was barely even a thing. It was on paper only, okay? Because the Parliament had created a system where the queens of England underneath the Tudor monarchy were inheriting the throne ever since this thing called the Third Succession Act. I think that was in 1563. Now, anyway, but their marriage was a sham, okay? It was an absolute joke. She was way older than he was, in her late 30s when they got married, and of course past her biological prime to produce children. And also, he claims that he was extremely unattracted to her, but she was very attracted to him, right? She was like, he's so handsome. He was like, ugh. But also, it said that he did not live in England, that they never slept in the same bed together, and that they were never able to have children. Now, Mary, though, however, did have a phantom pregnancy, right? So she actually, we believe, thought she was pregnant and wanted to be pregnant so badly that her stomach swelled and everyone believed that she was pregnant and her menstrual cycle stopped. And everybody was like, oh, you're pregnant, you're with child. And then several months goes by and there's no heartbeat, there's no nothing. They were like, there's nothing in there. Actually she wasn't even pregnant at all. And he didn't even live in England with her. And he cheated on her constantly with all kinds of other people, right? So the big thing is their marriage was a joke. And since she was older already, she only ruled for 3 years, and she dies right after they get married, right? So, and when she dies, that means that Philip has just lost the throne of England. Now, some of you are like, but I thought we were living in this man's world of Europe where, like, he would end up becoming king of England because he's a boy. Well, I like where your head's at, but Aaron and Brooke, I know, are going to be a big fan of this. He did not receive the kingship of England. The queenship of England then passed to Elizabeth the First, the Iron Queen herself, right? The woman, the best, my favorite female figure in all of European history. Elizabeth the flippin' First, right? Elizabeth the First then inherits the throne and immediately undoes everything her sister did, takes England back to Protestantism, and is like, I am done with this garbage. I am not about to let you get all over this, okay? Back off. Now, like, another big thing, though, is then Philip goes up to Elizabeth and is like, hey, how about we get married so I can stay king of England? And she says, hey, how about no, right? And she denies him any type of marriage, right? Denies him of this, and Philip becomes enraged, right? Absolutely enraged because he had just lost another part of his empire that he was trying to build up to show his daddy who was boss, right? So now, probably though, what also ends up happening is there's a very, very large interwebbing of reasons why Philip and Elizabeth hated each other's guts, right? And the big reasons why are due to the fact that Philip asks Elizabeth to marry her and she says no. Philip then tries to tell her cousin to possibly take over the English throne, and then he would go off and marry her, and they would create a big Catholic empire. And that woman's name is Mary, Queen of Scots, right? And then Elizabeth hears about this, has her executed. We'll talk about that here in a second, right? So then also on top of that, the Dutch, or the people from the Netherlands, begin to revolt against Philip. Now, you probably don't remember this, but looking backwards, when Charles V split the Habsburg family in half, the HRE in Austria went to the Austrian branch. The Spanish branch received the Netherlands, a little bit of the Western Holy Roman Empire, Spain, all of the North American, South American colonies, right? So one of the biggest money makers for the Spanish was the Dutch Republic, or not the Dutch Republic, but the Spanish Netherlands is what they were called, right? And the Spanish Netherlands brought in goods from the colonies and distributed them throughout the continent and made them a lot of money. But the Dutch are then like, we are sick and tired of being ruled by the Spanish and Philip II with his weird, I'm going to marry Bloody Mary nonsense, right? And so they revolt and declare themselves an independent country in 1581, right? And when this happens, Elizabeth looks at the Dutch and goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And Elizabeth, write this down, allies with The Dutch, after they start to revolt against the Spanish crown, right? And against Philip. So Philip becomes so enraged that he decides that he is going to invade England directly. No one in Western civilization's history has ever been able to invade England directly. Big flippin' mistake. All right, so big mistakes in European history. If any of you ever become the dictator of Europe, or a very, very big queen in Europe. I know, I guarantee you, somebody like Alyssa Regis, who, got that regal last name, is going to be queen of Europe one day. Big advice here, Alyssa, don't listen to anybody and never try to launch a naval invasion of England and never try to invade Russia by land, okay? Just don't do it. Promise. You can do anything else you want, but don't invade Russia. We'll talk about that later. And never try to invade England, okay? Just don't do it. It's not going to work, right? So this event culminates and leads to what is known as the Spanish Armada. And the Spanish Armada happens in 1588. That's an important year you're going to need to know for the test, and also because it keeps all this wound together, right? So in 1588, the Spanish Armada occurs, right? Now the problem, though, is that at this time, the Spanish Navy was larger than the English Navy, right? But here's the thing, Philip, you're going to try and attack with all these boats, right? And he brings 130 ships, which is an armada. An armada is a massive group of naval vessels. And all these 130 ships, they're what's known as Spanish galleons, right? And these Spanish galleons are very, very large, have multiple levels of cannon, and also have enough to carry small armies with them, right? They load these boats up, they put supplies on them, they get ready, and they go out towards England. But here's what ends up happening. The second female ruler and first ever supreme ruler of England, who was a woman, beats the Spanish Armada against the odds, right? She shouldn't have been able to win given the numbers. They were outnumbered heavily, their boats were smaller, and they were also about to be directly invaded by a very large power. But they end up winning because they use these things known as fire ships, and they also get a little bit lucky. And this right here, that is Queen Elizabeth's victory portrait after she believes that she has conquested the world and defeated the Spanish with her armada, right? So the big thing, though, is how they won, okay? So the Spanish are going to end up launching their invasion of England right here. Let me go back. Right here in the English Channel, right? So right through here throughout the English Channel. So Spain's down here. They're going to launch their invasion, and they're going to try to invade England directly through this area, either over in Wales or towards Sussex, right? So down in southern England. And then they wanted to invade on the land into London. Well, they were met by a very decent-sized English force of naval vessels, but also by pirates, right? By the people that Elizabeth apparently had romantic entanglements with, her privateers, right? And Sir Francis Drake had devised a different set of systems. They were going to use their smaller and lighter vessels to split the Spanish Armada lines and then pick off the galleons one at a time, right? And they did this by luring them into shallow water where their lighter English boats are more maneuverable and actually can go up behind the Spanish galleons and destroy them. They also use these things known as fire ships. Francis Drake came up with an idea. He was like, you know how you have old boats in the harbors that we don't use anymore? Let's light them on fire and just shove it at the Spanish galleons. And it actually ended up working. Caused massive chaos. It was able to help them split the galleon lines and actually was able to help them take out the Spanish galleons one at a time. Now, they didn't lose all of them, though, at that first engagement. So the Spanish decide that they want to sail all the way around Scotland and then go to Ireland, and they wanted to get a bunch of Catholic soldiers in Ireland because the Irish were still devoutly Catholic. And the Irish also didn't like the English, even though the English controlled Ireland, due to the fact that they were all Protestants, and Henry VIII is a huge jerk, and he told all of them to stop worshiping Catholicism and all this other stuff. And so what Spain's plan was to land in Ireland, recruit an Irish army, and then hop over to England and invade from the north. But then they got stopped by a bunch of storms in the northern area of England, and it sank a huge number of their vessels, right? So all these Spanish vessels are now sunk, and then all of their food is also going bad. Apparently, a bunch of spoiled food also helped lead to the Spanish Armada loss for the Spanish. But also, I just love the fact that the second female monarch in all of European history defeated the largest navy that Europe had seen up to that point. How wild is that, right? So it's absolutely insane. Go Elizabeth. We love that Iron Queen, right? And after this is going to serve as a moment in time where Spanish power begins to decline, right? And they're going to begin to decline after this loss to England. Now, some historians are always like, they actually didn't begin to decline yet. They were still much in power until the 1600s, and blah, 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 blah. That is true, but we can all admit that Spanish naval dominance was never the same after the loss to the Armada, or after their Armada lost to the English, right? There's going to be a lot of other stuff like the Treaty of London and things like that, but Spain's power does begin to decline as of the 1600s and the 1620s due to a lot of different reasons. However, from 1556 till about the Spanish Armada and a little bit past it into the 1620s, Spain did go through a golden age of art and literature, right? And all of this was installed by the massive economics that were coming in through the colonies, right? Since the colonies were bringing in gold and silver and sugarcane and molasses and all these other products that they were selling, and chocolate and all this other stuff, right? So, and all these potatoes and corn, and they're making all this money, you're going to see a huge leap forward in their art, right? So big ones are going to be Greco and Velasquez, right? These are two good examples. This right here is El Greco. That is the, this is the ascension of Charles V, because it's actually Charles V's funeral portrait. This is when he actually died, not when he faked his funeral. This is actually him right here in his armor ascending into heaven, right? And then this one is La Minueta, and it literally means the miniatures, right? So, and it actually is by Velasquez. And the interesting little part about this painting is that is Velasquez, right? So you're like, but why is he painting himself, Mr. Terry? Well, the original subjects were supposed to be these two people in the mirror in the background. These right here, those were the Habsburg rulers of Spain following Philip II's reign, right? And it was supposed to be of them, but he decided to paint what the viewers were seeing while they were being painted. And this is their daughter right here, the Habsburg princess, and these are her ladies in waiting. And this person right here is probably another lady in waiting, but we believe that she is a little person, right? And then also you can see a nun. There's a mysterious figure in the background, but it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's hyper realistic, right? And it shows the progression of Spanish art, right? Now, literature is going to be a big thing as well, and one of the most famous stories of Spanish literature ever, and also of European history ever, is going to be written, and it's Don Quixote, not Quixote, all right? So Don Quixote was written by a man named Cervantes, right? So Cervantes writes this story where it romanticizes the age-long gone Middle Ages, right? It romanticizes the ideas of chivalry, knights saving damsels in distress, and blah, 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 blah. And it does this with its title figure, Don Quixote, right? Don Quixote is a little old man who is very, very wealthy, and he sits inside of his library all the time. So just imagine Mr. Terry. You know, he's kind of a curmudgeon, right? And I'm just sitting in my library, and I'm like, remember the good old days? Remember the good old days when knights saved damsels and chivalry was true love and we were in better times instead of this modern garbage? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get some armor, right? So and what happens is Don Quixote puts on his old armor, his old knight's armor, and he brings his assistant along with him, a little guy named Sancho Panza, who actually is a very, very small guy, and Sancho Panza rides a mule, and he actually rides a donkey, and he is supposed to be like his conscience the entire time, right? But he's actually physically real. And then Don Quixote, in one very famous scene within the piece, because he's a little old man, looks over into the distance, and this is kind of a big screw you to the Dutch, looks over into the distance and sees a windmill. He's like, look at that giant. I'm going to kill it. And then he goes to charge it with a lance, and Sancho Panza's like, hey, Don Quixote, I don't think you should do that. And so he ends up, because he can't see very well, because he's a little old man, right? So it's kind of like a comedic little folklore tale, and it's very, very interesting, I think anyway. Now, Spain is then going to continue to weaken following their golden age of art and literature. So as about 1620, their power begins to decline heavily. We're going to add a lot of stuff to this slide, so be ready, okay? So Spain begins to weaken, and the three big reasons why they begin to weaken is because of the Dutch, which we're going to talk about here in a second, inflation, which you already know what that is, and also because stuff's getting a little too expensive, right? Now, some of you are probably like, do you mean inflation is making stuff too expensive, or do you mean that stuff's getting expensive and there's inflation? I mean the latter. I mean that stuff's getting too expensive and there's inflation, right? So mainly, let's start with the inflation piece first, right? Why is there inflation in the Spanish economy, right? Why is it occurring? And it's all because of this, Spanish imports of gold and silver. All right, let's see if we can find a little graph real quick. Here we go. There we go. Nice. Look at the amount of gold and silver coming in to Spain from 1505 to 1650. Look at the massive amount of literal golds and goods coming into their ports, right? Look at this. Look at this. This is insane, right? This is in tons, okay? So massive amounts of increase as of the 1560s, and then also in silver increases, gets up to 2,000 tons of silver annually by about 1611, right? Now, what's going to happen, though, the issue here is going to be if you have too much money available in your economy, people are going to begin to get charged more for their goods, and inflation is going to wreak havoc, right? So oddly enough, Spain found too much gold and silver in North and South America. They got too much money all at once, and it ends up destroying their economy, right? Now, also, another big one is because there were no Jews or Muslims, not heavily populated groups of them anyway, left in Spain, due to the fact of this thing known as the Spanish Inquisition. So do me a favor underneath this, right? Write the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was a deliberate attempt held by Isabella and Ferdinand, Philip II's great-grandma and grandfather, right, to try and rid Spain of anyone who is not a devout Catholic, right? So they tell Jews and Muslims during this time, you have two options. Leave or possibly be arrested. Leave/arrested, or you can convert to Catholicism, right? So they try to run out all these Jews and Muslim people out of Spain completely, right? And then it gets into a huge problem where the Spanish Inquisition starts because that's held to see if people truly converted or not, right? So, and they're trying to hunt down these people called conversos and stuff. And it causes a massive exodus of Jews and Muslims out of Spain, right? Now, here's the issue with that. The Jews and the Muslims were in smaller, tight-knit, segregated communities within Spain, and they were very well known for making very, very nice products, being money lenders, lawyers, dentists, doctors, actually being heavily educated, so they brought a huge amount of stuff to the economy. So with the Jews and the Muslims not involved in the economy anymore, quality of goods went down. And because there's so much money available in the Spanish economy and inflation's getting so intense, people do not start working or taking up the space from the Jews and the Muslims. They start turning to France and other countries to buy goods that are more expensive, right? So, that's going to negatively affect their economy. And then also, the Dutch revolted as of 1581 against Spain, and England allied with them. And this is going to cause massive Spanish debt, an insane amount of Spanish debt, and it's going to lead to their eventual loss. After 80 years of war, the Spanish end up losing to the Dutch, and they lose out, and they actually don't even have enough money to stay valid anymore, right? So now we're going to get into something else, okay? We got a little bit of time left on this flip, okay? And we're going to go ahead and start the English stuff, okay? Because you guys are ahead, and we're going to stay ahead, and we're just going to, and we're just going to just keep on going, right? Now you have to understand, during the 1600s, there's a lot of crisis going on. You got the English Civil War, the Spanish Armada in 1588. Wars of religion are breaking out all over the place, right? But a lot of this started for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of it heavily involves this place. Where is this? Where is that? That is Parliament in England, also known as Downing Street, right? So this right here is the Parliament building on the Thames River in London, all right? So now let's take 2 seconds and discuss what the heck that thing does not do, or what it does do, right? Now, the modern-day Parliament building is the one I just showed you, okay? So the big thing about Parliament, though, is where it comes from, what it does, its job, everything else. So in our era that we're talking about, the Parliament building actually looked a little bit more like the one that we have on the screen right there, right? So okay, there we go. So we're going to have a little bit of whiteboard action, okay? So we can draw a little bit of stuff. Now, interestingly enough, though, what is the Parliament? Mr. Terry, what does the Parliament exactly do? Well, first of all, let's discuss where the Parliament actually comes from, right? So there's this thing that was created in, ew, this is a terrible marker, gross. All right, so, all right, there was this thing that was created in 1215 called the Magna Carta. Yeah, Kermit. Now look, in 1215, this document's going to be created. Now what this thing is it's kind of a constitution, right? So what this is going to create in constitution. All right, so What this is going to create inside of England is a thing known as a constitutional monarchy. So what it does, though, in the Magna Carta is it gives basic rights, all right, but it also establishes a legislative body, right, a legislature, and that body is known as the British Parliament, right? Let me respell that. Parliament. So what the British Parliament is the same thing that we refer to as our Senate or our House of Representatives or any of those other things, right? So you need to understand that the Magna Carta it's going to create the parliament, and it's also going to give citizens basic rights by limiting the power of a monarch, right? So let's discuss, though, really quickly, what does the parliament actually do? What is it? What does it look like? Well, first of all, you got to understand one very important thing about it. It is known as a bicameral legislature. I'm going to write that word up here. So we're going to go a little bit off the parliament thing as well. Let me make it a little bit bigger. The parliament is a bicameral legislature, okay? Bicameral, what the word bicameral means is it means it has two houses, right? Just like is our legislative body a bicameral legislature? It is. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives, right? Now, in England, though, which our legislative body is modeled off of, their bicameral legislature, known as the Parliament, has two houses. It's the House of Lords, that says Lairds, and then House of Commons. Now, over the centuries, since 1215, this becomes the dominant house, the House of Commons, right? Because it represents the common people. Now, Parliament has a lot of very, very important duties, all basically outlined inside of the Magna Carta. Now, look, so what does it do? Passes laws that directly affect citizens, right? So if you want to pass a law in England, it's got to be passed by the parliament, right? It also upholds citizens' basic rights, okay? Some of those basic rights include the ability for a king to not take your property without cause, the ability to have a jury trial. That's our habeas corpus right? We're also going to have ones where the king cannot unjustly arrest people without cause, right? So a lot of different things like that, which is going to be violated by a king we're going to talk about soon. But most importantly, what the parliament does is they have a power known as power of the purse. They approve taxes and raise them, and they spend tax money. So kings in England have no ability to raise their own tax money or do anything they want with tax money without the approval of Parliament first. Because the way the Parliament views it is that money belongs to the people because they paid it to help you out and to help the country, not to go straight into your pocket, you privileged little... So now look, but why would this drive an absolutist insane? Because absolutists believe that they have complete power over everything in their domain. That money goes to them, and they decide where it goes because they are the best one to figure it out. Now, so the big thing, though, is you got to ask yourself a question. So, Mr. Terry, what about the Tudors, right? The Tudors were intense. So you had Henry VIII, he creates a brand new church, you know what I mean? He invades Ireland, he does all this stuff, and then you got Mary, right, and everything else. How did they work with Parliament? Surprisingly enough, the Tudors worked very efficiently with Parliament. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Henry VIII believed he was making England stronger, right? By making them separate from the Catholic Church to create a more powerful nation and things like that. So the Parliament worked right alongside with the Tudors. And one of their favorite rulers the Parliament has is known as your girl, Elizabeth I. But unfortunately, Elizabeth I, one of the darkest years in history, in 1603, and one of the most important years that you're going to need to know for the rest of the ages in this class, just like 476, 1215, 1066, and all the other ones, is 1603, when Elizabeth dies, right? So Elizabeth I will die in 1603, and we are going to see the rise of a new house. But we will talk about that stuff tomorrow in class. Y'all have a good one.